Well, hello and welcome to the stream. Let's go ahead and see what we can get into. We're going to do a little bit of Art Bell with Linda Moulton. Now, mutilation. Edits for reports, science, environmental, real X-Files news for her award-winning website, BritFiles.com. She's been in 6 seasons of the History Channel's Ancient Alien series, as well as producing monthly radio reports for Coast Coast AM and Dreamland Online. 6 seasons. Boy, that's really into it. Since her graduation from Stanford University with a master's degree in 1966, Linda has received local, national, and international awards, including 3 regional and national Emmy nomination and a Station Peabody Award. Adding to her 40 journalism awards in 2013, Linda was honored with the first, it looks like, Lucius Farish Foundation Award for excellence in research and production concerning the UFO phenomenon, and in 2010 awarded the Courage in Journalism Award at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. She has produced 4 books that include over 1,000 photographs, illustrations, and leaked government documents concerning her investigations into evidence that extraterrestrial biological entities have been interacting for centuries now with Earth. In 2013, Linda participated in a journalist witness, that should be, concerning extraterrestrial evidence in the citizens' hearing at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., held before several retired congressional representatives. Here is Linda Moulton. Hi, Linda.
I thank you, Art. My gosh, it is so good to hear your great voice on the air again.
Good to hear yours on the air, too. How long has it been? When did we last do a show? Any idea?
Probably George started doing Coast in 2004, and I think that 2003 or the end of 2003 was our last Coast together in Dreamland.
My God, that's 10 years now. To be fair, we've seen each other since.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I guess we can tell everybody about that later, but so it's been 10 years. I mean, 10 years since the air, my goodness gracious. Okay.
From the broadcast, and hopefully what we have worked on together we can do in another dark matter at some point here in the upcoming future.
Okay, there's something I want to ask you about up front that's not on your list of stuff.
Right.
I'm getting increasingly frantic emails about Fukushima. Now, things like TEPCO has no idea how to stop the leaks. Stuff like scientists have no idea where the cores of the nuclear reactors are right now. About leaking water, about tanks that are bursting. It just sounds like a mess, Linda. Serious mess, and I'm wondering what you know.
Yeah, I keep up with it through a professor who teaches in Japan, as well as people on the East Coast who have been following Fukushima, what they call it, a catastrophe equal to or greater than Chernobyl. And the most recent in-depth report I did goes back to August 29th. And that was right, I think it was just 1 week after what is called the Tokyo Electric Power Company, and that's where you hear that word TEPCO. And it was one of the most depressing announcements that I think I've ever heard, that they had lost or had been leaking 80,000 gallons of highly radioactive water for an entire month, and no one knew until the end of August when they finally hung up to this. And at those times, that is 80,000 tons, that's about 300 tons of this leaking water. It contains strontium-90. And strontium-90, as you know, is a bone-seeking isotope. It stays in the body. It has a half-life of 30 years, which means when it's breaking down the radioactivity of strontium-90, and then you have cesium-137 there too, but strontium is going to take, with cesium, about 300 years to get back to background. And that means, without question, there's going to be increases in bone cancer, cancer of nearby tissues, and leukemia. And that professor who stays in touch with me, Art, he moved his wife and his children from Japan to Australia because of his, he was taking a radiation monitor around his yard and the school where his young children played, and he was finding enough of the background that was contradicting what the Japanese government was saying was safe X miles away from Fukushima. And on top of all of this, because of just the last announcement that they had lost track of that 80,000 gallons, it provoked the International Atomic Energy Agency to basically go to Japan and say, how could this happen? And now they raised that level from what was the United Nations, they have the 7-point International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale, and it went up after 2.5 years from the first 3/11 disaster. The crisis went up to a level 3 now. Again, it's climbing back up toward Chernobyl. And one of the things that when I asked Dave Lockbaum, he's director of the Nuclear Safety Project for the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I asked him, what do you guys understand about the radioactivity of this water? What kind of exposure are we talking about? He said, when some objective readings were taken at the end of August, along with that TEPCO announcement, it showed that if you or anybody were standing 2 feet from the water, the 80,000 tons or gallons of escape, you would get the equivalent of 5 years worth of radiation in just 1 hour.
At the time this occurred, I was in the Philippines, in Asia, so we were very concerned. But as it turns out, the prevailing, I don't know, ocean currents and oceans bring it more toward, frankly, here than they do in the Philippines, so we feel better about that. But one thing that's very worrisome, and I want to ask about, is the fish. You know, Filipinos eat lots and lots of fish, and while it's a long way away, they're all worried, and I wonder if we should be worried. In other words, the fish are in this water all the damn time, right?
Right. Well, you know, that is one of the most complicated questions. In my own Earth File reporting, I have continually asked, how safe is Japan's fish and farm food? And you get answers all over the map. The professor who's there, and he has people who have gone into the supermarkets with radiation counters. They have said, and he has said to me, I love to eat any seafood. I've changed my entire diet. And that's from somebody who's living there. And here is, now let's go to somebody on the outside who is not living there, but is trying to monitor in the Pacific coast of Fukushima, and that's Greenpeace. Greenpeace has, just a year ago, they put out a warning that they were seeing much higher than normal radiation in some of the fish that they have caught. But what happened today? There was a newspaper article in which the Japanese government is saying, no, they've done sampling of fish and there is nothing to be concerned about. But here's the thing. The professor and everyone I've interviewed, and that includes people in both Tokyo and Fukushima, and they say, and this is a quote, we can't trust anything the Japanese government says anymore, and that's why so many people are trying to do their own monitoring, but they're up against this. This is a fascinating cultural aspect of Japan. The government always has had a policy, it's sort of as a metaphor of those beautiful white lace gloves that were on the cover of one of the news magazines after the horror of 3/11, of a woman who still had on her white lace gloves up against her forehead, surrounded by the ocean water and the trash. And the professor has said to me, this is a country in which everything always goes for politeness. No one talks to families about cancer or sickness. And the government does not want anyone to talk about the radiation from Fukushima. They've got the Olympics now. They've got everything to be fine. And now they're talking about a contradiction between what is a political policy and what is the reality of a few people there who are trying to get data to the rest of us on the outside. And where does all this come down? A professor won't eat any of the seafood in any market anywhere in Japan where he is living. But Greenpeace has reported that they have measured radioactive rice, beef, fruits, vegetables, milk, and baby formula. And as recently as January 2013, I'm reading from the notice from Greenpeace, quote, fish caught off the coast of Fukushima measured 250,000 becquerels per kilogram of radioactive cesium. Now, what does that mean? That amount of radioactive cesium is 2,540 times the legal limit for human consumption.
Holy smokes. I'm always that politeness until you be polite. Sometimes I guess maybe it will. I spend a lot of time in Japan, and that cultural comment is so right on. The Japanese are wonderful people, but they're not perfect, and they are polite to a fault, and this one is just going too far. I do understand this. It's scary. It's actually scaring me because we're in that. If you look at where the fallout comes when bad things happen, it seems to come down over the northwest and then down over the desert southwest. So, we're in line over here. One other question, if you don't mind, and then we'll leave this, and that is the cores, the melted cores. I really don't know where they are. And I've heard that, when a radioactive core like that that's melted and all together, you can begin to have reactions. I know I'm walking in kind of a dangerous area, and I'm not talking about a sudden atomic explosion. I'm talking about a burst of radiation. Is that possible?
Okay, I sent that exact question to Dave Lockbaum at the Nuclear Safety Project, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and to Arnie Gunderson, who does Fairwinds, and he has a strong nuclear engineering background, and he's been extremely concerned about Fukushima. In fact, it was Arnie Gunderson who first said, well, at 311, this is going to be worse than Chernobyl. Once we realize that, I think people need to get a picture in their head that the spent fuel rod, all that radioactive water is in units, so 6 units, 4 of which were involved in the catastrophe, are 100 feet above the ground. I think people haven't kept that in mind. The construction is the spent water and the spent fuel rods are above the ground. The nuclear cores are below the ground. And so TEPCO and the Japanese government have had this two-headed monster on their hands now since 311, worrying about what's going to happen if all that radioactive water that they've been trying to get into now, there's 1,000 tanks, and they keep building tanks that are full of all this radioactive water. Something serious has to happen, and that's why in just the last 3 or 4 weeks, there's been a discussion about how can they get those nuclear cores that are still so radioactive underground out, and can they do it safely? And meanwhile, what do they do about all of the spent radioactive water in the spent fuel, where the spent fuel rods are above ground? And that's why the Japanese government, in certain desperation, is saying that they are willing to spend several $1 billion to literally build an ice core in a circle around all of the Fukushima TEPCO land. And that right now is what's on the next docket. But between now and then, many people are saying they're going to have to get those nuclear cores out.
Well, they're worried also about number 4 collapsing. I've been hearing about that.
That's right. That's because of that problem of the spent fuel water in the rods 100 feet above ground. And well, all the units have this issue with the natural unit 4. And so now, the only light at the end of the tunnel that I can give you on this most recent correspondence was that both Dave Lockbaum and Arnie said that they do not think right now that getting the nuclear cores out have reached any kind of a emergency situation. It depends on how the approach is done, but the Japanese government is now on top of TEPCO. They have officially said they're taking over all the next steps because TEPCO has not been effective, and TEPCO is a company now that no one in Japan believes, so they have a gigantic credibility problem. And right now in the United States, I think you've raised an extremely good question, Art. What will the consequences be in the next year if Japan loses control yet again of any of the steps, we'll call it the two-line water that's radioactive to us, and those cores underneath. Plus, they have over 1,000 containers now of all of that wastewater that they've been gathering. If there is another earthquake, and if it lands and splits land, and those containers break, or those cords break, or more of that fuel rod water comes down, we're in another serious crisis, and it will be probably worse than Chernobyl.
Well, I guess this kind of is the death knell for nuclear power. I was actually warming up to nuclear power again because I need it so badly, but I think this one puts a seal on it. What do you think?
I do think that's what's happening. I know that the professor in Japan says that there really is, even in that polite society where there's not supposed to be protest, that there is this growing sense that the government would like to see their nuclear power reinstated and reinvigorated, but that there appears to be a political climate pushing against that. And in the United States, the very fact that there has been one closure of one of the troublesome nuclear power plants just in the last couple of months, and that there have been protests against several others, I personally do not see how the United States, with nuclear power plants of very similar construction, with some differences in some places, but very similar parallels in some of our nuclear power plants in the United States, also on water, we could suffer something that would be similar to what happened to Fukushima. And who in the United States now would like to risk that after we have seen the horror of what has played out in Japan? So this is an ongoing story, as Dave Walkbaum and Union of Concerned Scientists and Arnie Gunderson have said to me. This is a story that is going to continue to unfold for at least the next 30 years.
You know, for somebody who wasn't prepared for this question, we sure have a lot of information about it. Thank you very much. All right, so we have a lot of ground to cover here. I see you've got it mapped out, half hour by half hour here. Where do you want to go first, and how do you want to do this?
I thought it would be really fun to sort of take your audience now with you and with me back to, I'm going back to, and I'm holding it in my hand, it is the original audio cassette that I put in my analog audio cassette player for, and it's labeled 1978 Bigfoot Howls, 1 minute edited for Dreamland with Art Bell, dated.
Oh my, yeah, that's dated, all right.
Yeah, dated June 18th, 1995. So as far as I know, that's when I first played this for you. And I thought it was so interesting in the Time magazine, those 4 pages that they did on you coming back to Dark Matter, that they put a list of iconic moments in Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. And they said, they highlighted this one about the Bigfoot Yowls. And so I'm going to set the stage just a little, and we're going to hear this again.
All right, good. Yeah, you have four pages in the magazine in Time of thought. All right, the stage is yours. Go ahead, Linda.
Everybody go back in your minds and think 1978, old analog audio recorders, nothing digital, nothing modern. And this woman who lives in Snohomish, Washington, which is about 30 miles sort of northeast of Seattle. She lives in this very forested area of the Snohomish Forest, which is famous for all kinds of strange creatures and animal mutilations and all kinds of things through the years. And she sees and hears first a high-pitched sound she doesn't recognize and went out on her porch. And the way she describes it, that there were a couple, at least two, 8 foot tall, and she used the words silver-backed, primate-looking creatures with dark, long hair, and they're standing at her gravel pit, which is about 100 feet from her porch. And they begin making this very high-pitched sound, so she went into the house, got her tape recorder, analog, and she stood on her back porch with this little recorder in her hand, holding it toward the creatures as they howled. And this is the same excerpt that I played for you back in 1995 from that old, sort of slightly scratchy analog tape from December 1978. Here we go.
Definitely. That's those are things you got to discount this out that you're reading in there. But the screams were just horrific. And where would they come from if not Bigfoot?
Well, now this is an eyewitness. That's what has always made this audio so powerful, and why I played it for you back in 95, is that we had the eyewitness description of this woman standing on her porch, and she's looking at these 8 foot tall primates. And right, I don't think it was more than a month or so after that I had played this for you, and we had talked about the whole Sasquatch phenomena on Coast and Dreamland. And I got this it was like a 8.5 by 11 or 14 package in the mail. And in it were a series of color drawings from a man that I call Steve Bismarck because he asked me to keep him anonymous. And he lives in Snohomish, Washington, too. And he was out pulling weeds on his dad's property on Easter weekend in 1977. And he said that he first heard a buzzing sound around him, and it made him look up, and to his complete amazement, daytime, blue sky, here is a big, he estimated 100-foot diameter silver disc, and it's coming right down to the top of one of the big evergreen trees, not too far from where he's pulling weeds. And as the silver disc settles down over this tree, the tree starts moving wildly as if there were almost hurricane winds, and that makes them even further because it was a completely still day. So whatever was happening, it was generated by this disc. And then, now, as he said, he's standing almost paralyzed, somewhere between fear and awe. And out of this craft, now, this is in your mind's eye, because he drew them, and I have all these illustrations in my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities. That's the second volume called High Strangeness. And so you see the drawings, and so I'm going to try to give you a word picture. Imagine columns of air coming down from this silver disc, and that the air has enough substance or motion or something that he can see that they are columns, that they're kind of translucent. And through these, or inside of these, he sees in each column, and this is his word, they look like Filipinos with brownish skin, slanted eyes, wearing a tight, sparkly blue leotard, and they came down in these columns to the ground. And they didn't pay any attention to him. And they went off, and this happened apparently several times, because he said there were at least 9 of these blue-suited beings that went off into the forest, and he is staring wondering what are they going to do if they did find him. When he hears, because he's watching after them, he hears a thud, and he turns, and there, coming down also in a beam from this craft is, and he said, 8 foot tall, long-haired Sasquatch that proceeds to follow right after the sparkly blue-suited Filipino-looking beings. And then he told me that he went to his dad's house and he called the Snohomish Sheriff's Office, and he got a deputy on the phone named Jerry Phillips, who I got to interview as well. And he told the deputy all about this and was shocked when the deputy told him, Steve Bismarck, that the sheriff's office was getting a lot of phone calls about strange lights in the sky and unusual animal deaths. And so the deputy, was coming out to check, because now this guy is reporting the UFO, the blue beings, the Sasquatch. Well, now, Deputy Phillips, when I did an interview with him, told me that he went out, walked all over, and at exactly the place where Steve Bismarck took him and said, here's where these 2 bizarre air-like translucent beams hit the ground, and these beings and that Sasquatch came down. Deputy Phillips told me that he found many, not one, but many egg-shaped holes in the ground. And then further on, in the direction that all these creatures had gone, he found a huge 5-toed print. He made a plaster cast of it. I have a photograph in the book. I mean, it's gigantic. It's one of those 14, 17-inch long, 8, 10-inch wide feet with toes. And when the deputy began doing more field research around Steve Bismarck's house, he came upon what he said was one of the strangest animal deaths of that year and the next year, when they were flooded with the bloodless, trackless animal mutilations. He said that hanging from a broken branch, something had broken a branch that was 9 to 10 feet off ground, was a deer hanging by the scruff of its neck over the broken branch, and had the classic ear, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals, and rectum cord out, no blood.
Okay, where do you even begin here? I guess, number one, I'm trying to picture the lady that you talked about standing on her porch with a tape recorder, chasing 8-foot Sasquatch animals, screaming in a way that would curdle the blood of anybody, and not running in terror, taking off like Wile E. Coyote or something. I don't know. I couldn't have done it. I couldn't sit there with that tape recorder. Did you ever have an opportunity to ask her the good Lord's name? She was able to stay planted.
Well, you know, the tape and the letter and the correspondence was sent to me through an intermediary, and I heard her voice on the audio tapes describing the dates and what she's doing, so I know her that way. But I can tell you that by being able to talk to the Sasquatch investigator who sent me this package, he said that she had heard these high-pitched sounds so many times in the forest that she had become accustomed, confused, puzzled. So that the day that for some reason they had felt comfortable enough to come up to her gravel pit, it wasn't like she was in fear of something that was immediately unknown. Remember that she had been hearing it. And I think if I'd been in her shoes and I had a tape recorder, I would want to have taped this sound too. As long as
yes, indeed. Linda, hold tight. We're going to take a break here. We're absolutely packed with all kinds of different topics that one wants to talk about. All we better take Sasquatch in general, how she feels about it, whether it's a done deal and a full body evidence force the existence of Sasquatch. And if so, how in the world is he fully treated? It's a big land. Actually, hold your balls for now. We've got a lot of reporting today. How you doing? Yes, and we're talking about Bigfoot. So extremely interesting discussion. I am so curious about Bigfoot. I have been all these years. That million question play, and I know I played. And got all the state, no question about that. But there's something I want to listen to. I want to take a very careful listen to this and see what you think.
Well, it sounds very similar. What is that?
It's a recording live always kept, and I wonder if it's a better copy of what you have, or I don't know into it, but this was my Bigfoot sound, or a Bigfoot sound, and it sure sounds pretty much the same to me.
Well, I wanted to tell you this is reinforcing. It is a separate audio. I've got the one from the woman, this one from yours sounds slightly different. And I'm going back now to June 25th, 2001. I got an airplane and I took off for Hong Kong to work as a reporter with a video production group for a TV series on Discovery. They were based in Hong Kong, and that's where I went first. And then we got in a more plane and we went to Hanoi, Vietnam, and then to Vientiane, Laos. And then we went into an old Soviet truck to take that route line up to where the DMZ was in the Vietnam War, where there were a bunch of people who had been reporting, and it had filtered into political authority in Vientiane, that they had seen something that the locals up at the DMZ between Vietnam and Laos, that they were reporting what they called wild forest men and females with human faces in large hairy bodies. And we went on this trip, and the first night we were staying, talk about rough accommodations, no toilets, no anything, but we had an empty cement building in which they had set up a whole bunch of thick mosquito netting, and each one of us was in a pot inside of this mosquito netting that was hard to get in and hard to get out. And at 2 a.m., for some reason, I was able to see a clock, and that's why I know. At 2 a.m., I came straight up, and my head went into that mosquito netting. And what I was hearing was the same Sasquatch sound that I played tonight. And in fact, Art, I had taken the same audio with me so that the Hong Kong production crew could hear that eerie looping sound. And we had played it for some of the locals that day when we arrived, and they had said in their language, yes, this was similar. Of all the things for me to wake up hearing, it was that high-pitched looping sound. And now, under this problem, if I cross the cot and the mosquito netting across, the crews were all laid out on floors, and then I'm making all that noise, I will miss hearing how long it goes on. And so, with equipment in a room about 50 feet away, I sat there in the dark, net mosquito netting, and the Vietnam-Laos border, listening to this sound. And that is a true story. We never saw it. We interviewed people, and when we would take the locals, and they would take us to the site, they would take their arms and gesture as small people. But going and showing us the branch that they have seen, what they call the wild people, taking branches of fruit, and that branch, I think it was a cameraman got out a tape measure, and from the ground up to the branch was 14 feet. So,
all right, here's what I want to ask you about, Linda. Everybody asks about this, so I'm going to. Here in America, if you live in a fairly urban environment, your mindset is going to be, oh, give me a break. How could an animal of that size possibly basically hide from humans and hardly ever be seen? Hardly ever, those are rare recordings we have, or certainly video is very rare and suspect at times as well. So how could an animal like that ever, or if it's not an animal, half human, whatever it is, hide from all of us? But on the other hand, if you live out where I live, or on up from Oregon and Washington, this kind of country, you can drive for hours and hours and hours and see virtually nothing. So there's a lot of land where people are not. So I sort of answered my own question, but the big question is, how are they not seeing more?
The consensus, and this is a hypothesis because it's not proved, is that the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, wild man, Yeti live underground. And that we are dealing with some sort of a primate species that, and I'm going to say these words, knowing I can't exactly prove it, but to me, there's too much circumstantial evidence not to say it, that if, like the documents that I've been exposed to in my work when I was working for HBO and other things that we can talk about in more detail, that extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapiens sapien, which is us, and those are words in an alleged government document, that the link between the Sasquatch Bigfoot and extraterrestrial deliberate creation of them to do work on this planet is strong. I've interviewed many people in the abduction syndrome who have been on a craft during an abduction, and they have seen what they say are 8 to 9 foot tall, hairy, Sasquatch or primate-looking entities on those craft. And in Snohomish, Bismarck, saw the sparkly suited people come down, or beings, and then saw the Sasquatch. Now, if there is genetic manipulation of all kinds going on in the earth by advanced non-humans, like Michio Kaku would say, in dividing the possibilities of the evolution of life in this 13.8 billion year old universe, that you've got the ability in a 4.6 billion year old solar system, which is what we're in, to have had at least another 8 billion before. And that if there are civilization trees out there, as Michio Kaku describes, theorizing, they have the ability to gather energy from suns, to manipulate its whole space-time, and to genetically create anything that they want, to use it anywhere that they want in the universe, in any planet with specific gravity, specific atmosphere, and so forth. So now with that as sort of a quantum physicist lens, if you go then to the abduction syndrome and what is reported, if these Sasquatch creatures or Yeti or Laos, wherever they are actually here doing work for something that we still don't even acknowledge as existing, and they were made to be underground, because that way they would be preserved from interaction with Earth's surface life as it's been described to me, and then they have some ability that might not always necessarily be organic as we think of mammals or creatures. And why I bring this up, One of the most interesting sheriff's reports that I remember seeing when I started working on my documentary A Strange Harvest about the global animal mutilations was in the fall of 1979. And that was only 3 or 4 years after this sheriff's report had been filed with the Cascade County Sheriff's Office in Great Falls, Montana. And the report that went to the sheriff was from a rancher out hunting at a .30-06 rifle, came around a bend, and confronted immediately in front of him was an 8 foot tall, reddish brown, long haired, looked like, I think he said, an orangutan or a primate. And without hesitating, the rancher grabbed his .30-06 rifle and shot. And the creature in front of him, this is a quote from the sheriff's report, disappeared in a flash of light. Now,
That's not, okay, so it's not biological, or
Well-
certainly not fully biological as are we.
or they are creatures who have the ability to escape Homo sapiens sapien surface life in ways that we do not understand, which goes to the heart of your question.
That's right. Why don't we find a little light really simple? Yes, indeed. Do you think that the preponderance of evidence, I'm sure I looked at a lot of it, says these creatures are real?
The best source, I think, is Jimmy Chilcutt. He was a forensics expert working for the Conroe Police Department down in Conroe, Texas. And it was back around 2006, I think. I did an interview with him about work that he had been doing and cooperating with the anthropologist Jeff Meldrum at Oregon State University at the time. They wanted to see how many plaster casts they could find that already existed. Was Jimmy Chilcutt, he had specialized as a police officer in collecting all kinds of human footprints. And then he went to Georgia, went to a zoo with the police department's permission, and he did plaster casts on orangutans and chimpanzees and all of this to increase his ability to say, okay, this ridge, these toes, this heel are from somebody who lives or it's not primate or whatever it was. That's what Jimmy was doing. He was specializing in that. And he said to me that in one of the castings that Jeff Meldrum, the anthropologist studying the Sasquatch Bigfoot phenomena, gave to him, that he came across what he said was, and I'm now reading from a Jimmy Chilcutt report, a 14-inch casting from Northern California in 1967. Now, a lot of scientists had seen this, and they had looked at this casting, but they all missed what I saw immediately, being now a latent fingerprint expert. These were derma ridges, and they jumped out at me because the derma ridges on this cast from an alleged Sasquatch displayed definitely not human characteristics, because they ran in a different direction. They had a different pattern flow than human feet, and they also had a slightly different pattern flow than primates, the non-humans that he had studied down in the zoo. So my first thought was, maybe these are fake ridges. But the more I studied them, the more I realized they could not have been fake. They were completely different ridges than I had ever seen at anything else. And we came to the conclusion, after I've been a police officer for 23 years, working with footprints and handprints, that this was something that we could now use the derma ridges in the plaster castings as one of the pieces of evidence that separated what we are calling the Sasquatch phenomena from humans and other primates. And Jimmy Chilcutt, in that interview, told me he had not a single doubt that there was some sort of a primate-looking creature out there that was leaving footprints in mud and sand that were huge with derma ridges that he himself said, this is it. This is what proves they are a different species.
Do you share that view?
Yes, I do. And the reason I do is because I have talked with so many people who have been in searches after the Sasquatch Bigfoot phenomenon, and I have read 3 or 4 books by scientists who have come at this from a zoology point of view. They want to prove it, and they can't yet prove it because they need the creature in some sort of either live in a cage would be preferable, and then you jump to, I personally feel that people in the abduction syndrome are trying to tell the truth to the best of their ability. And when somebody like Steve Bismarck said he saw this Sasquatch creature following those several blue-suited extraterrestrial biological entities in the forest in Snohomish at a time when there were all of those discs and lights and animal mutilations and marks in the ground and all of the stuff that happened, I think that piece in the puzzle with Jeff Meldrum and Jimmy Chilcutt and the scientists, and you stand back and say, because we don't have the body live or dead yet, does not mean it's not on this planet underground.
All right, there's been a great debate about whether a Bigfoot should be shot. You know, there are those who scream, no, of course not, they're rare, they're endangered, and the last thing I want in the world is kill one. Other scientists have said, no, we need the body. We need that evidence. And I wonder which side of that question you're on.
I hate to see anything be killed. It's just my nature. I would not want to kill a Sasquatch. I don't know if they are retrievable in a live form, meaning they are so strong, so big, so smart, so agile, that maybe it's not possible to get them into a cage. But to shoot one, I think, would just be horrible. So I don't.
Okay, so your answer would be no.
Yeah, my personal answer would be I would never shoot one.
I actually had a fellow on the show who had a very, very good story. I'm sure you remember that he shot a couple of Bigfoot. And he was very concerned, and I think rightfully so. He buried them, but I saw the map where those bodies were located.
No kidding.
Oh, no kidding. You know about this stuff.
Oh, wow. Well, that would be, you can still learn stuff about DNA from bones.
Well, I have sworn, and I intend to keep my word. It was released me to do so. I would not, show that to anybody. And he was actually worried when the police would become involved. He was frankly a little unsure what he had killed. I mean, he described classic Bigfoot, but if you really, you're going to think a single thing. He shot these 2 creatures, and he was concerned about possibly being prosecuted. His nickname was Bob Diet. I'll tell you what, we'll turn that over. We're going to do a break here. We'll come back.
Thank you, Art. And just to sort of connect to where we left off, and I was talking about Jimmy Chilcutt, I found during the break a quote from him in a 2000 interview that I did with him, and he had told Field and Stream magazine in an article about his work for the Texas police station, quote, I can assure you, there is an animal up in the Pacific Northwest that we have never seen, close quote. And I think that really sums up what everybody who has seriously studied Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti thinks.
I do agree with you. I think there seems to be increasing evidence. Now I notice there are those doing DNA work as well, right?
There is Melba Ketchup. She did a release earlier this year or the end of last year, and it was about her doing DNA sequencing that proved that the Sasquatch was a combination of Homo sapien and a primate that was probably a lemur. Now, I interviewed her. I read her entire website. I read all of the critiques of her, which there have been more than any support. And I think that part of the problem is that she did not have any easy way to work with, we'll call them formal laboratories, because as soon as she would tell them that she was trying to do genome sequencing on Sasquatch, they would back off. I don't know at this point the whole issue of contamination of DNA. That is a big deal. And neither you nor I nor anybody who is not in the what's called the paper chain, where you know you have the same person, the same process, the same gets the DNA, gets the tissue that has the DNA, that you know where it goes, you know to what lab, you know where it's kept locked, it's dealt with. The whole chain, paper chain on true credible science means that you are always trying to protect against contamination. And in the story of what Melba Ketchum said, apparently it is hard to, at least many scientists are critical that is not confirmed or that it wasn't protected. And here, how do any of us get a reality check on what was the contamination or not contamination? And that's the problem right now on that research.
So, contamination.
And contamination.
All right. Let's try this. This is such an interesting question. What do you think is the reason? I mean, all these animal mutilations and other mutilations that have been going on, they're horrible, but they must have a reason. In other words, if extraterrestrial biological entities are doing this, and it seems like they would. I mean, if our government wants cattle, they can find plenty of them and they can blow them off over the fields somewhere. So, what would they be looking at? Why would they be doing this? Do you have a guess?
Well, I'll take you back for a moment to the first shock, like a 20-volt circuit that I had with, he had just retired from the Logan County Sheriff's Office in Northern Colorado in Sterling. It was Sheriff Tex Graves. And from 1973-74 period on to when I sat with him for the first time in September of 1979, I was working on the documentary that would come to be known as A Strange Harvest. And I started on it in 1979 as Director of Special Projects at the CBS station in Denver. And I did so because my beat was then and has been since I graduated from Stanford in 68. If I had given 66, it was 1968 when I graduated. My beat was science and medicine and environmental issues, both in my work at Stanford, in the films that I was making, and when I got out. And Tex Graves was the first sheriff that I was referenced to as being somebody who had been by then to about 236 mutilation sites. Think about that. One sheriff in one place, and know that in the state of Colorado, during that period of time, that each county in some sections was over 200 animal mutilations. So in Colorado alone, in a 5 to 10 year period, there were thousands. There were thousands. So now I'm going for the first time, trying to get my bearings in a story that I only have the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News and the TV stations away from my own TV station, reporting all these strange, bloodless, unusual deaths. So He had retired and was in a vacuum cleaner shop in Logan that he was repairing vacuums after being a sheriff for so long. And he had gotten for me specifically to look at, I remember the count because I counted them all out on the floor, 266 color Polaroid photos that he had taken of all of these mutilations. And as I went through, there was one particular one that I asked him about. It was a spear, a heavy spear, a big spear, all black, lying on its right side, and the front legs and the back legs were together so neatly in such neat parallel that it looked artificial. But this is the way the sheriff photographed it at the mutilation site. That nothing had moved. Those hooves were on dry powder, and they are neat. There's no movement, there's no struggle, there's no tracks around this body, not even the spear's own tracks. And the head was down in a hole that the sheriff told me was 8 inches deep. And he said he stood there looking. The ear, the eye, the tongue, the jaw, the genitals, and the rectum are gone. The legs are as neat as a pin, no tracks, and here the head is down in an 8-inch hole. And he said, Linda, the only conclusion that we can draw is that whatever did this to this seer kept all of the body completely, totally paralyzed and immobile, except for the head. And the head, in some sort of agony, dug an 8-inch hole before it died. Now, I felt several things at that moment. I felt rage of what seemed cruelty. I felt fear about a technology that could do this. And then I said to Sheriff Graves, you're describing something flaunting its ability, as if there almost are calling cards in the way these mutilations are done, whether it's horses and cattle or dogs and cats, pigs. It's every domestic animal that you can think of, and I've seen photographs of deer, elk, marmots that have been subjected to exactly the same bloodless excisions, and the U.S. Forestry Service has known about them. And when I